Also in the Guinness Book of World Records, right?
I am?
Yeah. Aren't you in there in a category?
I don't know.
I think. Well, I read it. I think you're the oldest person ever to win a major race. Isn't that right?
Paul Newman was Hollywood's golden boy. Seriously. With those iconic, impossibly blue eyes, an effortless charm that could melt glaciers, and a heart of gold he poured into his charity work, he was one of the most beloved and respected actors of his, or any, generation. He was the quintessential movie star, a man who seemed to have it all, the talent, the looks, the legendary marriage to Joanne Woodward, and a reputation for being a total professional. He was, by all accounts, a gentleman. A class act. Cool Hand Luke, Butch Cassidy, Fast Eddie Felson, these weren't just roles, they felt like extensions of the man himself, but behind that perfect smile and easygoing charisma was a man with a long memory and very, very little patience for big egos, unprofessional behavior, and wasted talent. Paul Newman was a craftsman who believed in the work. He came prepared, he hit his marks, and he expected everyone around him to do the same. And when they didn't, that famous charm could quickly curdle into an icy disdain. While he was far too disciplined to air his grievances in the press, Newman kept a private list, a mental tally of the stars who, for one reason or another, he just couldn't stand. These weren't just minor disagreements, they were fundamental clashes of personality, politics, and principle. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of Hollywood's most respected figures. We're counting down the 7 actors and directors Paul Newman reportedly couldn't stand, and the shocking stories behind why they made his list. From petty on-set rivalries to deep-seated professional disrespect, you're about to see a side of Paul Newman you never knew existed. Coming in at number 7, we have a man who was, in many ways, a kindred spirit to Newman on screen, the tough, grizzled, and undeniably brilliant Lee Marvin. In 1972, Newman and Marvin teamed up for the buddy comedy western Pocket Money. On paper, it was a perfect pairing. Newman played an honest but down-on-his-luck cowboy, while Marvin played his old partner he ropes into a sketchy cattle-herding scheme. The film was even directed by Stuart Rosenberg, who had guided Newman to an Oscar nomination in Cool Hand Luke. It should have been a slam dunk, but the easy chemistry they were supposed to have on screen just wasn't there behind the scenes. According to co-star Wayne Rogers, Newman and Marvin simply did not get along. The friction wasn't from some loud, explosive argument, but from a fundamental clash of personalities and work styles that simmered under the hot Arizona sun. Lee Marvin was a force of nature. A Marine veteran of World War II who was wounded in combat, he carried an aura of genuine, hard-won toughness. He was also notoriously unpredictable, a heavy drinker whose behavior on set could be erratic. Photographers on the set of Pocket Money were even warned not to approach Marvin before a shoot because his mood was so volatile. This was the polar opposite of Paul Newman. Newman, while a notorious prankster and lover of beer, was obsessively professional when it came to the work. He was disciplined, painfully shy by some accounts, and believed in preparation, punctuality, and a quiet, focused approach. The core of the issue seemed to be this deep-seated difference. Newman, the meticulous craftsman, was paired with Marvin, the raw, unpredictable ID of Hollywood machismo. While no major blow-ups were reported, the tension was palpable. Wayne Rogers's comment that they did not get along especially well is a classic Hollywood understatement for what was likely a relationship full of daily frustrations. For Newman, a man who valued predictability and respect, working with Lee Marvin was likely a lesson in incompatibility, a reminder that on-screen partnerships need more than just talent. They need a shared respect for the work, something he felt was sorely lacking. At number 6 is a man who defined the other side of the cinematic coin in the 1970s, Clint Eastwood. This wasn't a feud born from sharing a movie set, but a rivalry rooted in deeply opposed ideologies and a career-defining role that one man's principles forced him to reject, and the other's pragmatism allowed him to seize. The role was Inspector Dirty Harry Callahan. In the early 70s, the script for Dirty Harry was making the rounds. It was a gritty, violent story about a renegade cop who bends the rules to catch a vicious killer. The part was offered to a string of A-listers, including Frank Sinatra and John Wayne, who all passed. Eventually, it landed in the hands of Paul Newman, who by then was not just a superstar, but a powerful, outspoken liberal voice. Newman was famously active in politics, campaigning against the Vietnam War, and even earning a spot on President Richard Nixon's official enemies list, an achievement he later called his proudest. When Newman read the Dirty Harry script, he saw a character that stood against everything he believed in. To him, Harry Callahan was a radical guy on the right, a vigilante whose methods glorified a right-wing ideology he found repellent. There was no amount of money that could convince him to play a part he found so morally repugnant. He turned it down flat. But in a move that would change movie history, Newman suggested the script might be perfect for another actor just starting to make his mark as a director, Clint Eastwood. Eastwood, who had built his career playing tough, morally gray anti-heroes, had no such political problems with it. As he later recalled, his first question was, why didn't he want to do it? When he learned of Newman's reasoning, Eastwood just didn't see it the same way. He saw an exciting detective story, not a political statement. He took the role, and the rest is history. Dirty Harry became a cultural phenomenon and launched Eastwood into the stratosphere. While the two men publicly respected each other, this incident highlights the fundamental gap between them. Newman couldn't separate art from politics. For him, the message of a film was paramount. Eastwood was more pragmatic, focused on the story and the character. This created a quiet, professional rivalry. They were two of the biggest stars of the era, representing opposing poles of Hollywood masculinity and ideology. It was a clash of values, a silent feud fought not on a movie set, but in the cultural landscape of America itself. Coming in at number 5 is the charismatic and powerful Warren Beatty. By the late 60s and early 70s, Newman and Beatty were two of the most handsome and sought-after leading men in Hollywood. They were close in age, had a similar magnetic charm, and were constantly competing for the same high-profile roles. This natural professional competition, however, seemed to highlight a deeper clash, fueled by how differently they approached the Hollywood game. Paul Newman was an actor's actor. He trained at the prestigious Actors Studio and believed deeply in the craft. He was known for his meticulous preparation and his serious approach. Warren Beatty, on the other hand, was seen by some in Newman's circle as more of a movie star than a pure actor. Beatty was a master of the industry's political machinations. He wasn't just an actor, he was a producer, a power player, someone who knew how to work the system. A director who worked with both men summed up the tension. Paul saw Warren as everything wrong with Hollywood. Too much politics, too much ego, not enough respect for the work itself. They were oil and water from day one. This fundamental difference in philosophy created a constant, underlying friction. The rivalry wasn't just about roles, it was about authenticity. Newman famously fled LA for a quiet life in Connecticut because he was so suspicious of the Hollywood system. Beatty, in contrast, mastered it, becoming one of the most successful producers in town with films like Bonnie and Clyde. For a man like Newman, it might have seemed that Beatty secured the best roles through power plays rather than pure, unadorned merit. The tension was palpable. The producer of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid initially wanted Beatty to play opposite Newman. But the film's director, George Roy Hill, had no desire to work with Beatty, a decision that opened the door for Robert Redford and created one of cinema's most legendary pairings. You have to imagine Newman breathed a sigh of relief. Throughout their careers, potential collaborations between the two consistently fell apart. For Newman, Warren Beatty seemed to represent a version of stardom that prioritized power over performance. And in Paul Newman's book, there was no greater sin. At number 4 is a man Paul Newman once deeply admired, which made his eventual disdain all the more profound, the legendary Marlon Brando. This wasn't a rivalry born of competition, but a deep, bitter disappointment in what Newman saw as a tragic waste of generational talent. Both Newman and Brando were disciples of the actor's studio, the epicenter of the method acting revolution. Early in his career, Newman was often compared to Brando, a comparison that reportedly annoyed them both. But beneath that, Newman held an enormous, genuine respect for Brando's raw, groundbreaking talent. He saw Brando's performances in films like A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront as nothing short of revolutionary. Brando had changed the game, and Newman, as a fellow serious actor, knew it, but that admiration curdled into frustration as Newman witnessed Brando's increasingly erratic behavior later in his career. Newman believed that great talent came with great responsibility. He showed up on time, knew his lines backward and forward, and treated everyone on set with respect. Brando, on the other hand, became notorious for his on-set antics. He'd show up late, if at all, refuse to memorize his lines, relying on cue cards, and treat the whole filmmaking process with a contempt that Newman found unforgivable. The breaking point reportedly came when the two were considered for a film together in the late 1960s. During meetings, Brando was supposedly unprepared, dismissive, and made a series of unreasonable demands. Newman watched in disbelief as the man he once idolized treated the project like a joke. The film fell apart, and Newman never forgot it. He began to see Brando as a cautionary tale, a genius who had squandered his divine gift. Robert Redford, Newman's close friend, later confirmed the depth of this feeling. According to Redford, Newman once said that watching Brando in his later years was like watching someone burn a Picasso for heat. He explained that what bothered Newman most was the wasted potential. Eva Marie Saint, Newman's co-star on Exodus, echoed this. "Paul believed you owed your best to everyone on set," she said. When he heard stories about Brando showing up unprepared, it offended his sense of professionalism. For Paul Newman, Marlon Brando wasn't just a difficult colleague, he was a profound artistic disappointment, a fallen idol whose lack of discipline was a personal affront to the craft he held so sacred. In the number 3 spot, we have a director whose legendary status was matched only by his rigid, controlling style, a style that clashed catastrophically with Paul Newman's beliefs about his craft. That man was the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock. Their battlefield was the 1966 Cold War thriller Torn Curtain. From the start, the production was plagued with problems. The studio, nervous after Hitchcock's last couple of films underperformed, insisted on casting two of the biggest stars in the world, Paul Newman and Julie Andrews. Hitchcock was against it. He felt they were wrong for the roles and was furious that their massive salaries ate up his budget. He was stuck with two leads he never wanted, and his relationship with Newman was doomed from the get-go. The conflict was a classic clash between two different eras of filmmaking. Hitchcock was old school. He famously viewed actors as cattle, pieces on a chessboard to be moved at his will. He expected them to say their lines, hit their marks, and trust him without question. Newman, on the other hand, was a product of the method. For him, acting was about finding the psychological truth of a character. He needed to understand motivation, to dissect the script, and explore the subtext. This approach drove Hitchcock absolutely insane. Throughout filming, Newman constantly questioned the weak script and picked apart his character's motivations. This infuriated Hitchcock, who saw it as unprofessional. At one point, after another of Newman's inquiries, Hitchcock allegedly quipped that the only motivation Newman needed was his enormous salary. For Hitchcock, Newman's soul-searching was a waste of time. He was making a suspense thriller, not a psychological drama. The tension on set was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Julie Andrews, caught in the middle, later said she did not have to act in Torn Curtain. "I merely went along for the ride." Years later, Newman reflected on the conflict, blaming the flawed script. "I think Hitch and I could have really hit it off," he said, "but the script kept getting in the way." But the damage was done. Torn Curtain was a financial success but a critical disappointment. The experience soured Newman on the old Hollywood system, where actors were treated as props rather than collaborators. For him, Alfred Hitchcock represented the tyranny of the director, a style that valued control over creativity and stifled the very artistry he held dear. The number 2 spot on our list might be the most shocking, because it belongs to the man who was arguably Paul Newman's most famous screen partner, his closest friend in Hollywood, and his partner in crime in 2 of the most iconic films ever made. That person is Robert Redford. Now, let's be clear, Paul Newman did not hate Robert Redford. They were dear friends who shared a deep respect and affection for one another. Their chemistry in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting wasn't just acting, it was the real deal. But as anyone with a close friend knows, sometimes the people you love the most are also the ones who can drive you the most insane. And Robert Redford, with one particular habit, consistently drove the meticulously professional Paul Newman up the wall. That habit was his chronic lateness. Paul Newman was a man of discipline. Punctuality was part of his code. Robert Redford was not. He often operated on his own time, showing up to the set hours late, keeping the entire cast and crew waiting. For Newman, a man who valued everyone's time, this was a cardinal sin. It was a sign of disrespect that grated on his very core. Director George Roy Hill, who helmed both of their classic films, noted there was a quality of reserve in both men that has them basically uncomfortable with each other outside of work. That discomfort was often just Newman's simmering frustration with Redford's casual disregard for the clock. What made it even more infuriating for Newman was that Redford was so damn good. As Newman reportedly complained to the director during one of Redford's late arrivals, "The worst thing about this kid is that he can show up 3 hours late and still be better in one take than most actors are after a week of rehearsal. It's infuriating." It was the ultimate irony. The thing that drove Newman crazy was part of what made their partnership so magical. Redford's chaotic energy was the perfect counterbalance to Newman's controlled presence. Their friendship was famously defined by a long-running prank war. After Redford had a wrecked Porsche delivered to Newman's house as a gift, Newman retaliated by having the car crushed into a cube and dropped in Redford's living room. In a 2015 interview, Redford acknowledged their dynamic. "Paul and I were opposite in many ways. He was organized, I was chaotic. He was always on time, I was less so. But maybe that's why it worked." Newman, for his part, summed it up with his signature dry wit, "Working with Robert Redford taught me patience. I had none." So while it wasn't hatred, the daily irritation Newman felt toward his beloved, brilliant, and perpetually late friend earns Redford the surprising number 2 spot, and now, we arrive at the number 1 spot. The actor who, more than any other, represented the absolute pinnacle of Paul Newman's frustration and outright dislike. This was Hollywood's most infamous feud, a clash of 2 titans whose egos turned the set of a blockbuster into a personal battleground. The number 1 actor Paul Newman hated the most was, without a doubt, Steve McQueen. They should have been friends. Newman and McQueen were the 2 undisputed kings of cool. They shared sandy hair, piercing blue eyes, a rebellious image, and a serious passion for professional car racing. But instead of bonding, those very similarities fueled a bitter rivalry. McQueen was intensely jealous of Newman's prestige as a serious, Oscar-nominated actor. While McQueen was the king of cool, he desperately wanted to be seen in the same league as Newman, and that insecurity poisoned their relationship from the start. The rivalry first ignited behind the scenes of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. McQueen was offered the role of Sundance, but his ego couldn't handle sharing top billing, and his demands led the studio to cast Robert Redford instead. Missing out on that iconic film reportedly haunted McQueen and set the stage for their eventual, explosive collaboration. That explosion came in 1974 on the set of The Towering Inferno. The producers secured both superstars, paying them each a record salary. To solve the billing issue, they came up with a creative poster solution. McQueen's name appeared first, but Newman's was placed slightly higher, creating a visual tie. But for McQueen, it wasn't enough. The battle had just begun. His on-set behavior became legendary for its pettiness. He became obsessed with not being upstaged. According to multiple sources, McQueen meticulously went through the script and counted every single line of dialogue. When he discovered Newman had 12 more lines, he demanded that the screenwriter write him 12 new lines to ensure perfect parody. He also insisted he get the final line of the movie, whether it made sense or not. This behavior utterly disgusted Newman. His friend, A.E. Hotchner, visited the set and found Newman demoralized. "Every day here is like going to the dentist," Newman complained, angrily recounting the line-counting stunt and calling his co-star a chicken shit for his antics. For Newman, who saw filmmaking as a collaboration, McQueen's me-first approach was a betrayal of the craft. He saw every film as a battlefield to be conquered, every co-star an enemy to be vanquished. The feud was so toxic that McQueen reportedly refused to ever work with Newman again. The clash on the towering inferno became the stuff of Hollywood legend, the ultimate story of two superstars whose immense talent was overshadowed by an even bigger ego. An ego that Paul Newman simply could not tolerate. So there you have it, the 7 figures who managed to get under the skin of Hollywood's golden boy. The stories of these feuds paint a fascinating portrait of Paul Newman, not as a flawless icon, but as a man of firm, unshakable principles. His conflicts weren't born from a diva-like temperament. Quite the opposite. They came from a deep, abiding respect for the work. He couldn't stand wasted talent, which is why he was so disappointed in Marlon Brando. He couldn't abide by unprofessionalism, which fueled his frustration with Robert Redford's lateness and his disdain for Lee Marvin's unpredictability. He was repelled by ego and petty competition, which made his rivalry with Steve McQueen the most bitter of his career. And he bristled against anyone, like Alfred Hitchcock or Warren Beatty, who he felt valued power over creative collaboration. Those who knew him best said Newman never let these feelings compromise his performance. The work always came first. That was his code. These conflicts don't tarnish the legacy of Paul Newman. They define it. They show us that behind the famous blue eyes was a man with a clear vision of right and wrong, a man who held himself, and everyone around him, to the highest possible standard. And in the often shallow world of Hollywood, that might be the most admirable trait of all. What do you think? Were you surprised by any of the names on this list? Who do you think was Newman's greatest rival? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look behind the curtain of classic Hollywood, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories about your favorite movie legends. Thanks for watching.